Hello and welcome to Casually Criterion bonus episode. My name is Chris.
And my name's Mike.
And my name's Justin. And this is a bonus episode where we are going to talk about the film Darkest Hour. Trying to cover all of the Oscar Best Pictures and get a review in. So here we go.
So look forward to the rest of those episodes, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about the Darkest Hour because I don't know anything, or I don't know what you guys think about it at all. So, sometimes with the Criterion movies, we kind of know where we all stand to begin with. But this is going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess, Mike, do you want to kick it off? Just tell us, generally, what did you think about the movie?
Sure. So I guess if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know what it is. But Darkest Hour is a movie directed by Joe Wright and written by Anthony McCartan, and it's starring Gary Oldman as Winston Churchill, and it takes place during World War II, during the events of Dunkirk. Yeah, so that's basically a summary of the movie. This is one of the Best Picture, Best Actor contenders for Oscars, which I think probably surprised no one, because it seems like an Oscar contender. That being said, I think this is my favorite Joe Wright movie since Atonement. It's not without its faults, it being a biopic and suffering from the same faults that most biopics do, but I was thoroughly entertained by this movie, and I thought Gary Oldman was phenomenal. What did you guys think?
Well, real quick, I have a question. Since we're talking about Gary Oldman real quick, I was wondering, I always have this issue when there's they're acting performances that are so heavily influenced by makeup. Right. And I guess it's probably the same question you'd have for like the CG, like Gollum or whatever. Like, what is his name? The guy that does the Gollum?
Anthony
Serkis.
Serkis, yes.
Yeah. But like, how much of it is the makeup and how much is actually Gary Oldman?
Yeah, right. And a lot of times I find like makeup to make someone look different kind of distracting. Mm-hmm. I kind of found it distracting with that Charlize Theron movie that she won for.
The Monster?
Right, and I find it distracting like when Nicole Kidman put on the Virginia Woolf stuff.
The nose?
Right,
yeah.
But this one I felt I didn't have that. He even has like freckles and moles in different places. And I don't know, I think for some reason I feel like the old age fat suit makeup in this movie is way better. Like, for example, like another movie that was coming out this year before it was altered was that one that Kevin Spacey was in, All the Money in the World. Mm-hmm. And in that, if you look at the trailer with Kevin Spacey in it, he has like old age makeup on to make him look a little different, and it looked terrible in my opinion. Like, it looked bad just based on the trailer. Like you can look at a still picture and be like, this looks terrible, and then you can look at a still picture of Gary Oldman in this movie, and I feel like it's night and day. But I don't know. What did you think? You kind of brought that up. So did you find this makeup to be distracting?
I don't know how much of it is the makeup's fault or my fault. But yeah, I guess I was distracted sometimes by trying to trying to find the seams.
Where does Gary Oldman end and the makeup begin? Yeah.
You can tell it's Gary Oldman by his eyes.
And his mouth.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I think that mouth was so pudgy, like his lips, but yeah. So I guess I was a little distracted. I don't know that detracts necessarily from the movie, but yeah, just because I know the actor and I know that he's in makeup. Like, if it had been a no-name actor, like I would have bought into it more. But I'm looking for the moments that I can see
the seams.
Yeah, the seams and Gary Oldman, and that's partially on me, I think.
I think it's just the nature of these types of roles, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyways, that was kind of a distraction. What did you think, Justin? What was your initial thoughts?
Overall, I really enjoyed it. I don't know a whole lot about Winston Churchill. Mm-hmm. Didn't know a lot going in. I guess I know more now if I take everything that happened in this movie as fact, which I have no reason. I don't really know one way or the other, but I have no reason to believe it's not. But I do struggle sometimes with these sort of biopics that are very, very historically accurate and about a very specific like event in history or character in history that like I enjoy watching them, and I can recognize that they're good. Like there's a lot to like in this movie, and it's very watchable, more so than I thought it would be. But I also feel like I will never watch it again. You know,
I could see that.
And I think I guess I don't know if that's like a good thing or a bad thing or neither with a film like this.
I think some movies don't necessarily lend themselves to that. Like some movies do. A lot of movies definitely improve with secondary viewings, but I don't think just because this movie is one that doesn't lend itself to rewatchability makes it any less good. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I would agree. I think it's just hard to compare it to a film like like Get Out or
even Dunkirk about similar
or Dunkirk.
themes.
Yeah, where I get out and I'm like, man, what a cool movie. Like I would love to watch that again. Or like I can't wait to watch that again. Or like if I've seen it in theaters, like I can't wait till that comes out, right? So I can own it and watch it anytime I want. Mm-hmm. And like it's very easy coming out of a film and feeling that way to be like, what a great movie, right? So mm-hmm. I find it a little harder to put my finger on movies like this. It's like I know I enjoyed it. I think technically it's really well shot. Like the
opening
lighting.
shot is really awesome, in my opinion.
Yes.
The first moment we see Churchill, like where he lights his cigar, mm-hmm. and it's just like a orange flash in his face, and that's kind of a Joe Wright. I mean, Joe Wright's movies are always really good looking.
Yeah, and it's very dark, which I guess thematically fits with like these really like harsh shafts of light. Like
it's not called The Brightest Hour.
That's true, but like a lot of times when these actors like get in these pools of light or walk through these pools of light that are in it, like they are overexposed mm-hmm. a lot of the times, which I thought was really an interesting choice. Like the scene where Churchill actually gets the position of prime minister.
Oh, he's talking to the king?
Yeah, they're both in this like otherwise like pretty dark room with there's these big windows with like huge amounts of light coming through. And it's just like they're basically overexposed, like really close to overexposed. Mm-hmm. It's this very interesting, like dramatic, like a Renaissance-esque lighting.
I think it's really interesting because World War II, is there any other like event that has been so well documented on film? You know, like where we've adapted it to film, like
no
because.
Way.
Like that was the thing, huh?
No way.
Well, I mean, I know it's this big event and it's a very important event, but like, I was thinking while I was watching this, I was like, man, I could do like it would be a perfect triple feature. So, well, for one thing, both movies that are nominated, the two movies that are nominated are based on the same event, you know, mm-hmm. or somewhat. And then the other one that I really wanted to watch with it was The King's Speech, because like so you could have this trilogy. So you have The King's Speech, who is in The Darkest Hour.
Yeah, the character.
Yeah. And then you could go into The Darkest Hour and you see Churchill because I think you watch Dunkirk and it all kind of ties in together and
yeah. And then you can watch Inglourious Bastards to have like this totally
happy ending
to everything after going through all of those movies.
Yeah, because that has Churchill in it too.
It does.
I don't remember Churchill in that.
Yeah, he's briefly in it. He's in one scene.
He hires Michael Fassbender for Operation Kino.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess one thing I wanted to ask you guys, with a film like this, I guess we have plenty of records of like Churchill speaking and talking, and I assume that Oldman's performance and everything was like based on that. But like, I always wonder about how do you feel about acting when it's essentially an impression? A lot of the times, is it hard to do an impression and then give a performance this good that's like this believable?
Well, I think we have a good comparison this year. It's not necessarily nominated, but it was talked about for being nominated, and that's The Disaster Artist. And I think the difference between James Franco's performance and Gary Oldman's performance, which are both imitation, you know, like based on real people, I guess we would say. But I felt like Oldman's performance had depth to it, or an inner life, mm-hmm. whereas James Franco's was surface level, like Saturday Night Live type impression. And
definitely.
So yeah, that's kind of the difference. You got to put. So I think from the acting perspective would be, so you have to like adopt the way Churchill speaks, and then you have to put the emotions behind it, like as opposed to just doing an impression.
Yeah,
just saying the words. So,
and that's I think what I'm asking is like, while doing impression, in a sense, you also have to put the performance behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's like doing two things. It's like patting your head and rubbing your belly at the same time. I don't act, so I'm,
so for instance, like from an actor's perspective, I guess, and nowhere near as good as James Franco or Gary Oldman, but like I think it's so if you're playing a character that has never been alive in real life, you still make choices. Like this character has a limp, but that's not all the character is, right? So in the impersonation, the choices are made for you because you have a document of how this person was, right? So you have to adopt those choices and then put the performance behind it, or put the emotions, the inner life of the character on the screen is what I would. That's my take on it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say that I don't think there's like a rule necessarily, like a one rule fits all thing where it's like, okay, this feels more like an impersonation and this feels more like acting and like living this character, right? But that being said, there's no set rules, but Gary Oldman, to me, it feels like night and day. Like, to me, it feels like Gary Oldman is doing so much more than James Franco did. And that's obviously the script and a meatier part, more to do. But
yeah, I think not so silly of a character.
Right, but there are parts in The Disaster Artist where James Franco needs to be upset. And there's parts in The Disaster where he needs to be mad. And the intensity in the eyes and the I don't know, the way Gary Oldman shakes when he's mad, you know. You can see him do the same thing when he's not doing Winston Churchill, even in roles that require much less than he's doing, right? Like, did you guys see a movie he was in a couple years ago? He had like maybe 15 minutes of screen time in the whole movie, but Dawn of the Planet of the Apes? Mm-hmm. He's not in that movie hardly at all, but he's fantastic in it. Just his little bitty small part, because he brings so much humanity to everything he does. This vulnerability of a man who is determined to do something and maybe doesn't even fully believe in himself. You know, he can pull that kind of thing off, and I think he taps into that in Churchill. And sure, there's the impression part of it that can maybe seem like, okay, I'm watching an awards contender. I feel like Gary Oldman, he's aware of that, and he's a good enough actor to where to me, it never felt like what you're describing.
Yeah, well, for me, the difference between Franco and Oldman is Franco's is a little bit more like, I'm James Franco, look at me doing this impression, whereas Gary Oldman disappears. Like, does that make sense?
Sure.
Is that due to the makeup, though?
Yeah, but is that due to the makeup you don't like?
No. I mean, I think that's part of it, and that kind of brought me out of it. Like, if Gary Oldman had just played him the way Gary Oldman looks, I still would believe him more than as Churchill, more than I would Franco as Tommy Wiseau, right?
Sure.
So, I guess like in terms of performances, I also thought that his wife was very good. Was it Kristen Scott Thomas, who I've seen in a couple of other films? I know. I feel like I've seen her in several films. I can really only think of one, which is I've loved you so long.
Yeah, that's a good movie.
Which is really good, and she's great in it as the wife. I thought the secretary girl was really good too.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where I've seen her before.
Baby Driver.
Or if she just.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Now
we know.
Lily James.
There it is.
Yeah, I was totally like the whole time. I was like, I've seen her somewhere before.
Yeah, Lily James, and there was also I always bring this up, but there's Stephen Delane of Game of Thrones fame. He played Stannis Baratheon, and he also is in this movie as well.
Oh, yeah. I didn't recognize him either.
Rocking a wacky accent.
Yeah, and like no hair, which I guess didn't have hair in Game of Thrones.
Yeah, he played, Halifax?
Yeah, Halifax, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and also, before we move on from cast, Ben Mendelsohn whom I think is great, was King George VI.
He was awesome.
Yeah, he was great.
He's always awesome.
I think the secretary and the wife character are both like I think the secretary is one that like really like helped bring me into the movie a lot, like seeing the things like kind of through her eyes.
Sure,
she introduces us
for a lot of it.
Yeah,
and her reaction to finding out how many people were at Dunkirk and all of this stuff, because Winston Churchill is very he's very like, he's not overly emotional a lot of the times, right? Like he doesn't have these big reactions, and it's very like, and part of it is because it's his job as prime minister, right? To like to handle these things with like a certain grace and like calmness. But so we get through the secretary a lot of those emotions, and I thought her performance is like really key to shaping the film in that way. And the same with the wife to an extent. I don't think it's quite as important, but it developed this sense that there's, I don't know how, are we spoilering here? But also there's the whole scene where she's talking about how they've all lived their lives knowing that they come second in Winston's mind to his politics and his career, and her performance in, I mean, that could be very easily be like a weak, like self-loathing, sad part, and it doesn't necessarily feel that way, right? Like and she shapes that really well. I like her performance a lot. It gives a lot to like that side of it.
She almost seemed proud of it. Like, this is our small sacrifice for the country, is that we don't have Churchill around. We don't have our father or our husband around to, like, that's our sacrifice.
Yeah, that's like the only time we really get any time with his family, any significant time, besides his wife.
But yeah, I think Gary Oldman is like he's like the standout. He's the only one in the poster and all this stuff. But I think there are all these performances around him that are really great. That help take the movie like beyond what he's doing as Winston Churchill, give it these extra layers that I really like.
Yeah, no, definitely. This movie has a really phenomenal supporting cast.
Yeah. What's your favorite moment, Justin?
My favorite moment? Easy, I think. I don't know if it's going to be everybody's, but the one time in the movie that I was like genuinely moved to where like my eyes started to like get a little watery was the scene where he takes the train and he takes the subway and starts to talk to all of the common people, basically, and asking them of like, what would you do? Like, would you fight, or what would you think if we entered peace talks and tried to make peace and negotiate with Hitler? Like, would you do that? And everyone's reaction, it's very, very moving.
Certainly. And I also feel like, though, it's very moving, but it also feels like the most like, oh, this is a biopic we're watching, right? Like this is the scene where they took some liberties, right? This is the scene we can rest assured is probably movie magic and not like based in anything factual. And I may be wrong on that because I don't know my Winston Churchill history.
I mean, he may have gone down on the bus, or but what happened down there, we'll never know or whatever.
Sure. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think one thing this movie does really well, and this is something coming from like an American who doesn't know a whole lot about Winston Churchill, I never realized he was so controversial within his own like ruling, right? Like I didn't realize he had such like an uphill battle right away, like from moment one, to try and save his country, and basically having to like fight tooth and nail every step of the way because no one wanted him there, right? I just didn't know any of that, and I found that to be like incredibly frustrating and incredibly scary at the same time, that like that it was that close,
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I think I knew that it was close like that, but I had never seen it told in such a way where you're like, oh wow, like peace talks was probably a very like good option, like and because they didn't have anything, right?
Right.
It was like, yeah, I thought that was shown really well.
Yeah, and it comes very close to happening, because the first thing that happens in the movie when the current prime minister steps down, and they're talking about stepping down and saying they need to name a successor, pretty much everyone agrees, like, oh, it should be Halifax, who's the main one who wants the peace talks and wants to negotiate with Hitler. And he turns it down. But like, had he not turned it down, he would have been the prime minister, and things might have turned out very differently. So it's like, and I guess maybe that's one thing that I didn't quite understand or grasp is his motivation, because Halifax's his motivation to turn down that prime minister job in the beginning, because it seems like the rest of it, he's plotting to
try to get the
job, Churchill, and get the job, right?
Yeah, maybe it's whenever he just genuinely believed that Churchill was fucking everything up, so he was just like, ugh.
Even then, he still didn't really want the job. He was like, and I don't know if it was because he was afraid to take the job in the current climate. You know, he's like, this isn't my time. Like, he was still planning on taking it later, right?
Yeah, he was afraid to take it whenever it was offered to him, but once somebody else was in it, he could criticize.
Yeah, it was kind of a no-win situation for whoever becomes prime minister, right?
Right. Well, and they knew that going in. They even said when Churchill was accepting it, he's like, I'm only accepting it because it's the worst time in the world to possibly get this job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I guess I understood that whenever it happened. Like, I thought, like, okay, he's not, it's a really controversial time. You're stepping into a lot. But I guess it's just like when the rest of the movie, it seemed like he was plotting to take Churchill out and like take over himself, or like wanting to make happen what he wanted.
Wasn't there a moment though with the prime minister, like when they're in the garden and they're talking about, like, we just have to get him to admit that he is not going to even entertain peace talks, and the old prime minister was like, and then you can take over, and even then he was like, he wasn't keen on it.
Yeah, and maybe I just didn't pick up on that. That's possible.
And maybe I picked up on it too much, but. Anyways, what was your favorite moment, Justin or Mike?
Probably one of like the couple really long shots that go around like way longer than they need to. With like Joe Wright does this in his movies, right? Like there's that really long shot. I don't know if anyone listening to this has seen Atonement, but there is a really long shot in Atonement on a beach that I think actually is Dunkirk.
That's like the I think it's like the famous shot of that movie.
Yeah, and I think that beach is supposed to be Dunkirk, believe it or not, in that long shot. But in this movie, there's like scenes where like the camera's just going down the road, like from the point of view of a car, like someone looking out a window of a car. Mm-hmm. And there's like scenes of little kids running around in Hitler masks playing around. There are people like playing instruments and walking and talking and shopping and eating and everything you could think of. It feels like a full lived-in country. It doesn't feel like they just like pointed it at a road, right? It feels lived in, and it feels authentic. And there are so many shots like that in the movie that are so much longer and more detailed and intricate than they really even need to be. Because, it's not like anyone was like, what this transition between scenes needs is some interesting street shots of people hanging out, right? Like, but Joe Wright likes to do that. He likes to fill his frames with stuff going on and make it feel lived in and make it feel like there's so much going on that if you don't catch everything the first time, that's okay because there's no way you could,
Yeah. And what really works about this to me is, and I may be wrong, but I think those are the only things in this movie in slow motion, right?
Maybe.
Because those are in slow motion.
Yeah. The one I'm thinking of specifically is for sure.
Yeah, I think it does that. I think 2 times in the movie we get this. It's kind of almost like a panorama in a way. It's like we track from like left to right as the car's going down the street, and we just see all of these people. And I think it's really smart to do slow mo in there because we're not tracking one character. Like we kind of start maybe tracking a character and then someone else comes in and we see them and we see the kids and we're doing slow-mo. So while people are doing their normal stuff, like we get to almost like look at every individual person. And I think that's really key for like Churchill.
Right.
Because
they're living their lives.
He's thinking about every individual person because every individual life is a life that's at stake with what's going on. Right. And to have that scene in slow-mo so we can focus on the different people, see every person and know that like this isn't just about Churchill. This is about every single person, and they're all individuals. They all are important enough to like focus on, right?
They have an individual life.
And you can do that with that one shot that is really cool without having to do the civilian story that's going alongside this, right?
Right. We don't need to introduce like another character besides like his secretary to follow so that we have like the perspective of the everyman, because Joe Wright filmed that scene in such a way to where what you're saying, we get exactly what is on his mind and like the weight of everything on his mind.
What do you guys think of the those crazy shots? So like when they do it several times, but like not the Dunkirk, but the other guys that were sent to try to help protect Dunkirk.
Oh, and like zooms up in the air.
Yeah, then they do it several times. They like zoom in, or I think Churchill it happens to at some point too. But what do you guys think of those?
Oh, or say transitions like we think it's a battlefield or it's like a battlefield and there's explosions, and then all of a sudden it becomes the skin.
Oh, that was one of them. Yeah,
is that what you're talking about?
That was one of them. But there's also like
that shot where it's like
times.
from the air, and then like those people get blown up.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of shots from like the bird's eye perspective of like battlefields, and you see like craters and explosions from like not filmed in a way that you normally do, right? Like normally you're like in the shit with the camera watching like dirt fly everywhere and people get murdered, but this time you barely even see any people in war, right? It's all from like the perspective of like an airplane.
Or would it be Churchill's perspective? You know, like
Yeah.
does that make sense? From a battlefield map type of thing,
Yeah.
or something
Yeah.
he's thinking about?
Yeah, it's used like I'm a big soccer fan. I watch a lot of soccer, and there's certain like websites that you can stream soccer matches on, like pay to watch them, and some of them have a tactical cam.
Just bird's eye view.
That is it's not quite bird's eye view, but it's like it's very high. Mm-hmm. It's one stationary camera that you can like see the whole battlefield, right? And then so it's like it's battlefield, the field and everything going on. And it's like to me, yeah, that's what this I thought of as like it's the tactical cam sort of view of like, because that's their viewpoint, and it's not about. We don't need the horror of war, because I mean I think we know
that's why we watch Dunkirk afterwards.
It's not what this movie's about, right? Exactly. Like we don't need to be in the explosion, feeling the terror of that, because that's just that's a different movie.
Yeah, definitely. I like how we see. We just reviewed Dunkirk the other day. I like how we see some of the same like Operation Dynamo.
Mm-hmm.
I like how we see it. Like the brainchild of it, right? Like we see the formation of it, and we get a little bit of background on it. It's a cool thing that like both of these movies got released in the same year, I guess, and that before I saw either of them, I was pretty ignorant to the Battle of Dunkirk, right?
Yeah. For sure.
And now I feel like I understand. Yeah. And maybe these are just Hollywood movies, basically. So I'm sure I don't. It's not like reading a history book, but. As someone who knew nothing about Dunkirk, I now understand that like Dunkirk is probably one of the most heroic battles, if you want to call it a battle, that's like ever happened. The idea of Operation Dynamo is, and I talked about this in the Dunkirk episode, is just so crazy heartwarming to me, and so heroic and so brave.
Yeah.
That like it's a fascinating event, right? That it doesn't matter what perspective you're seeing it from, the soldiers or Winston Churchill. It's a compelling narrative. Just the idea of everyday people stepping up because it's their duty to save their young men who are dying, 50 miles away across the ocean, across the channel. I don't know. It's really great, and I enjoyed seeing a whole different side of the same event from this movie, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like this movie's probably the one you want to watch if you want to learn more about Dunkirk.
Yeah.
After you watch Dunkirk.
Yeah.
But they lean on each other a little bit.
Yeah, and they complement
whether they
each other.
wanted to or not, or planned it. They probably didn't. But
yeah. So when I'm watching this, I'm thinking of Dunkirk and the horrors that are happening. Right.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking the whole time. I was like, God, those poor soldiers trying to get off that beach.
Yeah. You think of Harry Styles. Wasn't he in?
Yeah, and Kenneth Branagh sitting on that dock frowning.
Yeah. And that it just you're right. It's the perfect double feature. Yeah. And we can throw in the King's Speech.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess there's one last thing that I want to touch on, and like for me, before we call it done. But of course, if you guys have other stuff,
Call it Dunkirk.
Call it Dunkirk. Yeah. The lighting and some of the composition, we've kind of touched on a little bit how dark it is and how there's these like shafts of light. But there's also these scenes where like the one that sticks out in my head is after Churchill gets off the phone with Roosevelt. Is it Roosevelt?
Mm-hmm.
The American president at the time. I think it's Roosevelt. And after he gets off the phone with him, and he's basically asked him for help, and he gets nothing. He's like, no. Not only can you not like borrow any of our ships, but the ships that are the fighters and things that you have purchased,
you can't have those.
You can't have those. Either.
You can get a horse and carry him over the line. We'll do that for you.
Yeah. And so basically, he's got nothing, and like we get the shot, and it's the walls of the room, and it's in the center of like the frame, and then it's black on either side, right? Like it's an unrealistic shot, right? And we get several of those. There's one where he's in an elevator, and it just kind of comes down into frame, but it's like black on either side. So, like the filmmaking does a really good job, and I want to say like it those progress. Like he gets in the elevator and goes down, like, and it's very tight, like compressed in on him, right? Like we don't have. It's basically there's all this framing and composition that's showing how like everything's in like closing in around him, and like there's this darkness all around him,
isolating him.
Yeah, and it's getting closer and closer, and I think that works as well with like the cinematography. How there's these shafts of light and all this darkness. It's just like he's in the light, but like surrounding him, it's very very dark, and like there's just this sense of like or like paralleling like the Nazis coming in and coming towards England, and like this impending doom, this darkness slowly seeping in towards England and threatening to like overtake it. And I think it's very on point, and I like that.
Yeah, certainly. And there's actually one scene before we go that I wanted to bring up, because we were talking about Ben Mendelsohn earlier, and this is a spoiler for late Act 2 of Darkest Hour. So here we go. The scene whenever Churchill starts losing it, right? He's getting ready to do the peace talks, and he's unsure of himself, and he's rambling, and he's mumbling, and he's not the same Churchill we've seen the whole movie, right? And there's the scene where the king, played by Ben Mendelsohn, whom does not like Winston Churchill, and Churchill does not like the king, he comes to him, and you can tell the king has something on his mind, because the way Ben Mendelsohn plays it. He asks Churchill, like, oh, what are you thinking, And then Churchill's like, I think he even says, like, it would be helpful to know what's on your mind, or like what state of mind you're in. And the king is just like, well, first I want to hear you talk, But like the way Ben Mendelsohn plays that, you can tell he's got something on his mind. You know what he's thinking. He doesn't want to lay all his cards out of the table once and let Churchill knows exactly what he's thinking, right? He wants to lead the conversation there. I don't know. I found that to be really masterful. Like, it just seemed genuine to me.
Yeah, that was a really good scene. And it's a turnaround point for him, right?
Right. It has to be like a big scene for Churchill, but I think what Mendelsohn is doing in that scene, in my opinion, elevates it to something that I don't think it would have been otherwise.
Ben Mendelsohn's pretty awesome. I'll watch anything, like he elevates everything, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Yeah. I think my favorite scene before we go is the moment where he shows the secretary what dire straits they're in. Like he takes her. She's like, I'm not allowed in the map room.
Oh, he's like, you are now.
He's like, you are now, yeah.
And then he shows her, and the way she's like, I don't know.
That scene's great, right? But like, I remember when she's looking at the pins on the map, right? Mm-hmm. I remember when that scene was going on. I remember thinking like, her reaction is so over the top, right? But then, like, I think it's like 3 or 4 scenes later, you find out why she's upset. Mm-hmm. And then it recontextualizes the whole scene for me. At first I was like, this seems like a biopic moment, right? Like, you got to have, like, the every lady come in and oh, this is dreadful what's going on here. I have to, like, put into words and emotions what the audience is supposed to be feeling right now. But whenever you find out why she's so upset about what's going on at Dunkirk, is really emotionally rewarding, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, one more thing before we go. You guys have seen a lot more of the best pictures, and I'll catch up with you guys. But where does this rank out of the ones you guys have seen so far? Like,
ooh. Let me refresh myself on the best pick nominees real quick, because
well, I'll go ahead. Just honestly, I mean, it's probably towards the bottom, as good as it is.
I'd say it's right in the middle for me. I like it. I like it better than like Three Billboards or The Post, or even.
I feel like The Post and this are very similar.
Yeah, I like it better than Three Billboards for sure, but I'm not sure that I like it better than Lady Bird or Shape of Water. Maybe this and Shape of Water are about the same for me.
Yeah, I'd say that. Shape of Water and this one are probably right in the top middle for me.
Where there's a lot of technically great stuff going on that is really good and easy to recognize, and like I can't really point out any flaws in it, but there's just like I struggle to like really
get behind it,
really connect emotionally.
I can understand that,
and it's certainly an enjoyable film. Like it's actually, we haven't really touched on it too much, but like it's funny. Like there's a good bit of like humor in it and things that are really funny despite like everything going on, which is a challenge. And I think it's pulled off really well, like intermingling the humor with the seriousness of the situation.
Gary Oldman's got some charisma, that's for sure.
Yeah,
I like, and this is probably like a real Winston Churchill quote because it felt like a real Churchill quote. But the part when she's like, Churchill's talking to like a mom, and she's like, "My baby looks like you," and he's like, "Oh, madam, every baby looks like me."
Yeah,
I thought that was funny.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I liked it. It'll be interesting to see how it falls down in the rest of the movies when I catch up with you guys. But enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
It was fun, and I'm glad we watched it.
Yep. So that is it. Thanks for listening. If you want to, follow along. As usual, we got to do this. So
good point.
Yeah, you can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/casuallycriterion. You can like us or follow us on Twitter and Instagram at casualcriterion. Email us directly at casuallycriterion@gmail.com. And I think next episode will be our full regular episode, the off week on Phantom Thread.
Woohoo. Yeah, let us know if you guys like the bonus episode. Just chime in, yes, no.
We plan on doing more.
Yeah.
And if you don't want that, let us know.
Or if you do, let us know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess until Thursday, I'll talk to you later.
Adios.
Bye-bye.